So let me bring up the our little cheat sheet here. So welcome everyone to NRELabs episode 11. I believe it's episode 11. I am Cloud Toad, aka Derek Winkworth. I am the host today, and um, we are going to be talking with a community member named Brian Linkletter, who's written some very interesting blog posts for us, and he's definitely gone in head first into Entry Labs, so we thought it'd be pretty cool to have him on the show. Um, so why don't we get started? Uh, how you doing, Brian?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, is it? I think it's. Is it frosty where you're at right now?
It's surprisingly cold. We're in Ottawa, Canada. It should be a lot warmer than it is right now.
Yeah. Well, it is June. It should be warmer
Yeah,
here too, and it's like
yeah,
sweater and long sleeve shirt weather right now.
yeah.
Okay. Well, so tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I've been working in high tech now, telecommunications for over 25 years, and been through a lot of different roles as I've done that. Um, I'm currently a manager working in the training organization at a large high tech telecommunications vendor, and I've been for a long time now, I've been interested in network emulation, just from the point of view of the technology itself, because we use tools like that in our training labs, but also just as a personal project to keep on top of the technology. And uh, and so I've been interested in network emulators and started blogging about them more or less to inform myself, but also to just get a good list of network emulators out there. At the time I started looking into this, it was pretty hard to find an up-to-date information source about what tools were out there, what was available.
Yeah, especially open source ones, right? I mean, there
Yeah.
are some network emulators out there that are quite expensive if you want to pay the money for them. But there's a handful of different things that simulate different kinds of network, not just networks, but like you know um, simulated congested links and stuff like that to you
Hmm.
know to to create realistic, I guess, scenarios with bandwidth constraints and stuff like that. And there's all kinds of free ones all out there, but it's not like there's a guide that says here's all your options, right? You have to go looking for them.
That's right. And they're all based on different technology, which is interesting. So if you're exploring network emulators, I through that I started learning about software-defined networking, virtualization, etc., long before I had to use any of that technology at work. Now we use it, of course, every day, but back then in 2012 to 2014, when I was exploring all of this, particularly software-defined networking was just getting off the ground, wasn't something everybody had heard of yet. Yet you would see it being used to build some of these network emulators because, of course, the scripting, the orchestration, that's what they're all about. They're about putting different elements together to create something that other people can use.
Yeah, exactly. So, how how did you learn about NRE Labs in particular?
Like every other network emulator that I've written about, it was I came to it from something else. So I was working on a couple of other tools that you're probably familiar with, VRNetLab and Wistar, trying to understand them because I was noticing that there were this new family of network emulators was being created that was using Docker and containers. And that was really interesting to me. And just by working on those tools, of course, NRELabs started showing up in my searches. And then there were a couple of podcasts I listened to, uh, Packet Pushers being one of them, that mentioned it, that brought on, I think, Matt to discuss it. And so from there, I decided to check it out and take a deep dive into it and see how it worked.
Nice. So, do you can you give us so yeah, and it sounds like you got into it. I mean, you've written I think two different blog posts so far, and one of them is actually a pretty straightforward guide on how to set up the development environment, and then there's a second one where it's more of like how to build a lesson once you have that environment in place. So can you walk through those a little bit?
Yeah. In the first one, what I did, I put a little bit of a different twist on it because I wanted to use KVM instead of VirtualBox. So I just added the extra steps that are required to set up KVM. There's really only one thing. You need to install the KVM driver for Kubernetes or for Minikube, and then you just have to change that file. But then you followed up after that with an update, which is why in my second post I said fast moving project, because you guys had an update like 2 days later, which obsoleted my blog post because now you've integrated KVM in the self-medicate setup scripts. So then I modified my post just to kind of follow those steps. And then in the second, I was trying to build I'm trying to teach myself how to build a lesson in NRELabs. And in my opinion, well, the way that I learn things is I just get in there, start doing them, and then maybe I'll read the instructions. But but anyway, I start working on it and writing about it because I that's a great way to learn is to try to figure out how you would explain this to somebody else as you're working through it, keeping the notes because you know you're going to use them to write a blog post later. I found that when you're working on this, I found some problems. I was able to raise some issues, and you and Matt responded quite quickly, and I think some of them are lined up to be fixed in the next release of NRELabs. And we also talked a little bit about how the NRELabs handles certain types of lab endpoints. I wouldn't call them, they weren't really defects, they were just the way NRELabs worked. And you guys, I found that you guys were already thinking about how you were going to change that. So I feel that just by getting involved in the community, just by trying to learn about this, and then raising the issues on GitHub and communicating in the forums, I think that was just in itself a contribution because I was able to uh, put some things on the table, and we had a good discussion about it, and I think some things might change because of some of those points. So I feel really good about getting in there and trying things out. And then as a result of all that, I wrote this post which goes through how do you set up a lesson. And I would, people that are trying to use NRELabs, if you're looking at the documentation, if you're wondering how do I get started and things like that, it's actually really simple. Like you are trying to make NRELabs simple to use for courseware or for lesson developers to develop, I should say. There's only a few text files that you need to create in order to get a lab working. If you're not trying to create a new image, because that's something I haven't done yet, is to create a new type of image for NRELabs. If you're going to use the images that you and Matt have already put on NRELabs, then creating a new lab is really, really simple. You're just manipulating typing out some text files, putting in the commands that you want to be running in the nodes that you've defined in the lab definition file, and off you go. And you can iterate. You can build them one stage at a time and test to make sure everything works the way you want. And when you're done, you've got all of that working on your own laptop, and then you can contribute back to the project if you're ready at that point to contribute. And so I found it to be really, really easy to, well, I shouldn't say easy because I don't want people to think that if they can't get this on the first try that there's something wrong with them. It does take a little bit of, you have to read the instructions a little bit, and you'll probably find a few things that don't work the way you want them to just when you're getting started. But I mean, from the point of view of you'll have to just basically learn how the tool works. But it's relatively easy to get this going. I was very satisfied with the lessons, and I kind of started a lesson on just kind of like how to create lessons, which is what the example I made in the blog. And I don't know if that would be something that is contributable to the main blog, to the main system, but it's something I could start and do quickly. And so that's more or less what the blog post was about. That's how we went through the whole process of, or how I went through the process of trying to learn about NRELabs and creating lessons. And so there's just the lab definition file, and then once you've got that done, you just have to create the directory in which the lesson file will be placed. That's the stage. You just have a markdown file that is all the information about the stage that you're creating, or the lesson. And then if you want to create another part of the lesson, you just create another stage directory with another guide markdown file in it. And if you're using the Juniper images, you would have to have a configuration file in there for the devices. And what I found right now is, particularly the the lessons in there right now are all fairly basic lessons. So the same basic configuration will work for every node. We just copy the config files that are there right now. That's what I did. I'm not familiar with Juniper. I'm not familiar with Napalm. So I just copied the image file that was there, changed the IP addresses, and I had a lab. So it was really, and because the focus of this tool is on the orchestration and the management and automation tools that kind of go around these products. So if you're more familiar with Ansible or these other tools and you want to write a lesson about it, the barrier to entry is fairly low for you to bring your knowledge into this tool.
Yeah, Oberjix is excited that he sees you on the stream.
Oh, hey, Overchicks.
um, yeah, and you know what, you said something in there that was really important. People often think, I don't know how to code. I'm not familiar enough with how, this project is built and to make a meaningful contribution. But the thing is, that's there's actually no relationship between those things and making meaningful contributions. I mean, blogging, instructional blogging, like you've done, is in our minds is a meaningful contribution. And then raising issues, just if you run into a problem, you don't have to be the one that fixes it, but if you're the one that points it out, I mean, then it gets fixed, and that's a very meaningful contribution. So thank you for doing that, and I hope everyone who watches understands that that's a totally valid way of contributing, and it's actually very much needed. Um, so yeah, I so you have a thing here. Oh, okay. How to contribute. So, like, what is your? So, I mean, having said that, what is your basic, thinking or approach to how you go about contributing to projects?
I like to get started, well, learning about the project. And there's no, I think when you're new to a project, you're bringing something really special to a project. You're bringing the beginner's experience. And that's something that the people who've been working on the project for a long time don't have anymore. So that's really valuable to bring to a project. It may be obvious to you how something's done, but the beginner will show up and go, I couldn't find that in the documentation. And that's because in your mind, it was best put in one place, but a beginner might naturally look for it in some other place. So that's the kind of thing that any beginner can bring to a project. So I think it's very valuable when I start learning a new tool or get involved in a new community. I'm already bringing something valuable. I'm not worried that I don't know anything, that I'm going to ask stupid questions, because I think that mindset is actually pretty important. I like to get started helping out with documentation in a project. I mean, my blog posts are effectively trying to expand the documentation a bit, and I may get into trying to figure out how to contribute back to the project by putting some of that into your documentation via GitHub. And that'll be something else I have to learn, how to actually contribute to the project via GitHub. But I like to start with the documentation. Every project needs help with the documentation. They need it reviewed. Maybe they need new documentation created. They definitely would probably benefit from, again, the beginner experience of going through the documentation and saying, well, it would have been better this way for me as a beginner. Maybe a beginner's guide could come out of that, and things like that. So the documentation is a great way to get started contributing to a project. Um, yeah, and like I said earlier, my experience has always been the best way to learn about something is to think about how you're going to explain to somebody else. So as you're making your notes while you're working through this, a lot of that can be contributed back to the project, I'm sure. And then, of course, as you get more comfortable with what you're doing, for example, a project like NRELabs, you could contribute a lesson. And there, it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't have to be something you already know about. Like, I am in your target audience. I am someone who, I still consider myself to be a network engineer, even though I've been a manager for 10 years, and I want to keep my skills up to date. And so I'm learning about network automation and things like that. I'm not very familiar with it. I've got a basic ideas about a few tools, and I want to learn more. And when I come into a project like this, I'm not sitting here thinking, well, I don't know enough to contribute. I'm thinking, well, I should pick a topic, create a lesson on it, because while I work through that, I will learn it. And like I say, trying to create that lesson and trying to explain it to somebody else in a way that makes sense will help me learn. or I might I'll look for somebody I can work with if somebody's already working on something, or somebody, because you shouldn't always think that you have to do your own thing. You can get in and just help whatever's going on already. So I like there's been a few projects I've contributed so far in my investigations in open source, and in every one of them, it's usually been documentation where I've been able to help out. And I think that's been I think that's important. That's an important contribution as well.
Mhm. It very much is an
Yeah.
important contribution. A lot of in my, there are a lot of open source projects. When you go to their website, there's this weird thing when they don't have a lot of documentation, they substitute it with the message that it's so simple, you almost don't even need documentation, and it'll be some very complicated thing with like this hello world example that in no way provides any useful insight in how to actually use that project. And that's not a good substitute. And so documentation is super important. It's how people hack their way around. Without having, if they don't already know how to read code, they're not going to do that to learn how to use the product, or the the thing, whatever it is whatever project it is they're messing around with. Yeah, so that's absolutely true.
Yeah, it's true. There's so many great projects that the documentation could be improved. And in my experience, when I've been looking at tools I've tried to learn, there are some that because a lot of what I do is I'm looking at a lot of the stuff comes out of universities, network emulators and things like that. So I'll look at a academic paper where they describe it, and I'll go, okay, great, I want to check out that tool, and I'll go to the GitHub repository where the tool is, and there's not a scrap of documentation. There's just absolutely no way to consume this tool or even get started, because whoever created it really just put something on GitHub more probably to store it for themselves and not really to make it available to people. But documentation is so important. You can't ever get involved in something unless there's at least something to get you started. So when it doesn't matter how great the code is, if people don't know where to start or how to get at least something going, they'll never be able to get involved in your project or communicate or contribute to your community. So I'm a big believer that documentation is important. Training is important. Helping people, every product that gets sold today has to, if it's commercial, comes along with training, because people need to have a good experience using the product, and if they don't, then they'll just not use it anymore or not get involved. So documentation is very important, I think, and it's a great way. It's a very low barrier thing for people to get involved in and help.
Nice. Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very true. Um, so so how would you what would you say to a network engineer that wants to get involved with um with sharing, like as they're learning automation, or yeah,
Mm,
anything, even network engineering stuff, that's not specifically about automation, right? But
yeah.
they learn something new, right? And they want to share it, or they have some neat design, or something they did. What is your recommendation for how do they get started in the practice of sharing that knowledge?
Well, I'm a big fan of, I would call it creating your own platform. That's a term other people have used. And just start a simple little blog. There's so many, I won't get into the tools or how to do it because there's so much good information out there about how to do it. But just get started doing something like that. When I'm looking for information, I go to Google. I often find blogs by engineers who, in their about section, they say, this blog is just for me. This is my notes so I don't forget this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they put that in there, and then it's useful to the next person who comes along and finds it. And there are a lot of topics where the number one hit is just some individual engineer's blog, and so they're really helping the community that way. And it could be blogs, you could be doing YouTube videos. YouTube is full of videos of engineers explaining what they've learned or what they're working on. So it's a really great way to give back to, I guess, the technical community in general, is to I don't know, produce a blog. And anyone that really wanted to get into this, there's a couple of books that I read that got me started, and one of them is called Technical Blogging. I mean, you can just Google that or search it on Amazon. Technical Blogging. It's by Antonio Cangiano. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And I was just checking it before this call here to see if it was still available. And I noticed he's got a second edition coming out at the end of June. So even though I consider his first edition to still be 100% relevant, it was very practical. It's a how-to. It's all the tools. It's just do this, do this, do this, and that's how you do a technical blog. So it's not a lot of fluff. It gets you right into it, gets you doing something right away. And now there's a second edition coming out, so that would be even more relevant, I think, to the tools that are available today. And for inspiration, I think a great book is Crush It by Gary Vaynerchuk. He's a pretty famous media personality that talks a lot about building your own platform and building your own brand. And that book was written 6 or 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, but I still think it's relevant today. Like, he was writing about blogging back then. He's got a new book out about videos, but it's yeah, that, like, it's really inspirational. Makes you feel like, yeah, I should do this. So I think that those are two things I would recommend to anybody that wants to do something like this. And of course, there's a million blogs on how to, but I would say don't worry about, when you're getting started, don't worry about how it looks or what technologies you're using. Just start writing, just start putting stuff out there. You can always go back and reformat it or put it on a new tool or a new platform.
Yeah, I would make the. I would say I've written a few blogs, and I
Mm-hmm.
would, yeah, that's a hunt. That's totally accurate. The best way to get started is just to do it. And not every blog is going to be, the best blog you've ever written. And
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. It's not a big deal. Just keep doing it. It'll start coming together more and more often where you put something out that's a pleasure to read and it's informative, right? So it's a skill like anything else. You just get better at it over time.
Yeah, just do it regularly and don't get hung up on learning the tools too much. Don't be the guy that spends, a year trying to learn the word processor before you write anything at all, right? You just get in there and start writing. You can use a text editor at first.
So aside from NRELabs, what other open source like network simulation tools do you off the top of your head that you've
Mm.
enjoyed using or you've done productive things with?
I think that, well, there's the two I think the two big ones, GNS3 and EVE-NG, that don't need any love from me. They've got huge communities. There's a lot going on with those tools. I think they're generally used by a lot of people for labbing, exam preparation, and things like that. There's a lot of really cool smaller projects that are interesting just because of the technology they're using. They're all implemented in different ways, so you can learn a lot about the building blocks of virtualization and network automation by looking at which tools these people use to build these network emulators. One that comes to mind, an early one I started working with, and it's still going strong, is called Clunix, and it's just a bunch of KVM virtual machines, and it's got a nice graphical user interface. Uh, I really like the core network emulator because it's all based on containers. So on a small laptop like mine, I've got a 8-year-old laptop here, and if everything's just based on containers, and I know NRELabs is based on containers,
Mhm.
you could potentially have a lot of nodes in a network emulation scenario on a modestly powered system. So I really like, and it's got a nice graphical user interface as well. Um, some of the more interesting, modern, I would call them modern because they're now getting based on modern technology, are the tools I've started to see now, like NRELab. I took a good look at that one, and Wistar is interesting. It's another Juniper project. Looks like it's a little bit. It got started. Now it seems to be just kind of in maintenance mode, but and that's what happens to a lot of projects. They get going and then they kind of go on maintenance mode. But I'm talking, the ones I'm mentioning right now are the ones that I think are a lot more, they're active. They've got people working on them. If you raise an issue, it's likely that someone's going to get back to you. There's plenty of projects I could list where I think that uh, I don't know what's going on there anymore. They're interesting projects, but it's been 4 years since they've been updated. There's a couple of projects that I haven't looked at yet. Like, there's one called the Shadow Network Emulator, which is still an active project. I can see updates there. I haven't looked at it yet. That one is emulating peer-to-peer networks like Tor, the Onion router, and also can do Bitcoin, the Bitcoin networks and things like that. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
interesting, like, because of the technology it's emulating. Mininet is cool because it does software-defined network emulation, and Mininet has many variations. The interesting thing about Mininet is, of course, there's Mininet, but there's also Mininet Wi-Fi, MaxiNet, and these other things that were all based on Mininet, where different people have sort of forked it and taken it in some special direction. So there's a lot you can look at, and I list them all on my blog, so people can just go to Open Source Networking uh, and check that out. And it should be there's a list right on the right hand side of my blog.
Okay. Well, okay. So it's been maybe 25 minutes, and we were aiming for about 30 minutes or so for this particular
Mm-hmm.
stream. So I think you know what, I'll do a little bit of an outro, and we'll see if there's any questions in the chat. If your website is just it's brianlinkletter.com, right?
That's right.
Brian link Link letter Letter.com, and that's all one
Yes.
word, you know, brianlinkletter.com. So if you're listening and you want to check out what Brian's written about network simulators in general and NRELabs in particular, please go to his URL. And you can follow him on Twitter at BE as well. If you want to interact with Brian as part of our community, please join our Discord, uh, uh, which you can get instructions on how to do that on the Read the Docs for NRE Labs, and also join our discourse, our forum site at community.networkreliability.engineering. Um, thanks for watching. We don't have any questions, so uh,
Mm-hmm.
thanks for watching. And Brian, thank you for doing for writing the blog post, for opening the issues and helping us move forward with this project, and for being on the stream today.
And thank you very much for inviting me. It was a lot of fun, and it's my first video podcast. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, well, you might be coming back. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna send you a loot box, an NRE Labs loot box. Uh,
All right.
yeah, with
Woohoo.
a sticker and a shirt. Yeah. Um, I think you'll be the first. So yeah, thanks everyone, and follow us on Twitter at NRELabs, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.